the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
Jimmy's back in the full swing of things here. The retirement was short-lived, but we love it. First question for you, though. Your gut instinct, now that we're about 11 days of this recording before Tennessee kicks off their 2024 football season, your gut instinct on how this season ultimately goes for Tennessee.
I like this team. I think they're going to be really good. I think they'll be more entertaining than they were a year ago. Right now, I've got them pegged at 9-3, but if I had to lean in one direction, it would be more toward 10 wins instead of 8. I think the offense is going to be really good. I don't think they'll average 46 points, which they did 2 years ago, but I think they'll average a lot more points than the 31.8 that they averaged last year. I've got them averaging about 39 or 40 points. I think Nico's going to be really good. I like the receiver room a lot. I think the offensive line's adequate. I think the running backs are pretty good, not as good as a year ago, because I thought Jalen Wright was something special, and when you take him off the table. But I think the offense can average around 39 or 40, which will rank among the best in the SEC. The defense, I think, is going to be good. I thought it was good last year. I kind of think they were underrated, and I'll give you the numbers as to why I thought that. They ranked in the top 5 in the SEC in points allowed, total defense, run defense, sacks, tackles for loss. That's pretty good. And I think they can be even better this year, because I think their defensive line ranks among the best in the league. I think Keenan Peele at linebacker is going to be very helpful. I think he's a good football player. I don't think the secondary is going to be very good. It wasn't last year, and I don't think it'll be very good this year. But I think the other elements on defense, the front 7, if you will, I think will be really good.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, because like one of the things I've been talking about on this show with different folks was that like I think the corners are gonna be better than a year ago. I think Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson are gonna be really good players, probably the best corner combination Tennessee's had, especially upside wise, since Heupel and company have been there. I tend to look at the safety stuff. Like Andre Turrentine, I think will be fine. I'm not really worried about that one. I think Will Brooks will be solid. When you look at the last 3 years, one of the things that, especially when you talk about the front 7, when fans are really starting to freak out about whether or not Will Brooks and Christian Harrison are going to be starting at star and free safety, like that's a big concern among the fan base of like, what does this look like for the secondary? I would argue that I don't think you're going to notice the secondary drop off until you're in those really the Georgia games, the Alabamas, the Floridas. I don't even think you'll really see it against Oklahoma. 5 new offensive linemen for Oklahoma versus this Tennessee front 7 is brutal. I think that's just an underrated point where it's going to be on the road, but I don't see Oklahoma handling this front 7 well at all. So I kind of lean Tennessee in that regard right now. I think where Tennessee, and you talk about the strides they made over the last 3 years and TFLs and sacks and things like that, the thing that still has not gotten cleaned up to the point where it can kind of separate them in those big games is the 3rd and 8. Right? They're actually really good in 3rd and short. Like this is a really good team when it's actually close on 3rd downs. 3rd and long, it's just been a disaster. And that's where I worry for this secondary is in those games against Florida at home, where Graham Mertz at number 2 in the nation last year in completion percentage. Like you saw Anthony Richardson had the ball with a chance to win 2 years ago when Tennessee was 11.5 point favorite against Florida at home. They're only, I think, 10 right now. So I think that's more of a coin flip game than even 2 years ago it was. And look, I think that's my concern is those guys where it's that bend don't break on the back end where they don't want to give it the big play, but then you can get diced. And we've seen like the Ole Miss game was an all-time great version of that, where Matt Corral in 2021 just kept finding ways to get first downs on 3rd and long, and Tennessee just could not get off the field. They didn't get the big plays, but they can't get off the field and give their offense the ball back to get them in the game. I mean, that's my big concern. Do you feel the same? Because I don't think secondary comes up like 9 games for Tennessee this year, but I think there are probably 3 that I would circle where you got to get something. You got to have Boo out there. You've got to have a little bit of an upgrade, because you're going to run into those same problems of just not being able to get off the field on 3rd and long.
Yeah, and I might have more than 3 on my ledger in that regard, but I do think the concern is, to me, is exactly what you said. If you need to hold on to a lead against somebody, and it's in the 4th quarter, can you stop somebody on 3rd and 8? Can the secondary make a play? They didn't make plays last year. They didn't make a whole lot of plays the year before. Yeah. So that's a concern to me about their ability. what might have to happen is that while somebody's got 3rd and 8, you might have to sack somebody.
Yeah.
That might be how you stop them. But I'm not that enamored with this group. I know that Will Martinez, the secondary coach, has talked about how talented he is, how much he loves this room. Okay, I need to see it. Now, I think you may be right about the corners. I think the corners have a chance to be pretty good. But here's what bothers me a little bit, Chase. And as much as I've hammered the secondary for not being that efficient the last 2 years, so they lost 11 players, not counting Jordan Thomas who's out, but they lost 11 players from the roster. I think 3 of them went to the NFL. 6 of them signed with Power 4 schools. So does that mean Tennessee didn't get the best out of those players? If they were good enough to go to, I don't know, Louisville or Ole Miss, wherever, Arizona, or did those schools that brought them aboard make a mistake? I don't know. But for that many of them to go to a Power 4 school makes me wonder about Tennessee's ability to get the most out of their defensive backs.
I think it's definitely something that's going to be at the top of mind for every Tennessee fan. It's kind of funny, like where we're at right now, because if you look everywhere else on this roster, I think they're pretty deep. I mean, I guess it's probably for me the only 2 areas of weakness right now is probably the back end for the secondary, and then probably the depth of the offensive line. Like the recruiting on the offensive line has been fantastic. Like I'm not worried. Like in 2025, 2026, they're rolling. I think they're going to have some guys hurt in year 2. We'll see if David Sanders starts right away. But you got Bennett Warren. You've got a lot of dudes coming in here, and I think they're going to be able to figure out mix and match, and they're going to be okay on the offensive line next year and going forward. This year, my big concern is what happens if Andre Karich and John Campbell miss a lot of time again. And John Campbell was not available down the stretch last year. He's been they're being really cautious with him this summer and into fall camp. He's not at left tackle anymore, so that's less of a concern for Nico's blind side. But you're going Dane Davis again. Like he's the swing tackle. You're not like, it doesn't feel like you're going to go true freshman there. Bennett Warren, whoever, Gage Ginther. You're maybe Sham, who's been in the program for a couple of years now, but he's in the mix at left guard, so maybe he swings a certain way. But I don't know. I look at it as like this top 5, the starting 5 on the offensive line for Tennessee will be really good if they're able to be healthy for the full season. But if they get hit with some injuries, I mean, Cooper alone, like Dane Davis is like apparently going to be the backup center too. So Dane Davis might get more starts than over half of this offensive line just by nature of injuries and everything else and how important he is. But that's my big concern is just with how much last year. I mean, you look at the Florida game of not having Cooper there. That's a difference between back-to-back 10-win seasons, maybe, with how that game went. So I don't know. Is that a fair concern on your end too? It's just behind the starting 5 in the offensive line. There are huge question marks, at least only in 2024 for the Vols.
And Cooper Mays, to me, is the biggest one. No disrespect to the other offensive linemen, but you noted it. When Tennessee played at Florida, they didn't have Cooper Mays. They looked lost. They looked disoriented. They couldn't move the football against the Florida team that wasn't very good. I think he's their most important offensive lineman. You could argue whether he's the most talented, but I think he's the most important. Also, by the way, I've seen him on a couple of second-team All-America teams. So he's a really good football player, and he's kind of the quarterback of that group up front. I do think the tackles have talent. They got to stay healthy. I'm a little bit worried about the guard position. You mentioned Carrick. There's Jackson Lampley at that left guard spot. I don't know if Spraggins is going to be 100% at the beginning of the year. He came off that torn MCL. That was pretty significant. But I do think the starting group is going to be fine.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I just don't think they can afford injuries. And one of the things that I got to ding this staff on a little bit, they have actually recruited and signed some pretty good offensive linemen, but how many have they actually developed?
Yeah. I mean, still 0. He doesn't have a long-term starter, Glenn Ellery, to this point. There is not one right now that he brought in that he developed and is a long-term starter. Addison Nichols, he talked about, he's now going to start at center, it looks like, for Arkansas. 4-star from JC.
I liked him. I thought he was a good football player, and then he's gone. But they've not been able to go out and sign offensive linemen, develop them, and have them turn into good players. Cooper Mays was signed by a previous staff. The tackles are transfers. That concerns me a little bit. Now, I do think they have signed some really good offensive lineman prospects for down the road, but they can do a better job of developing those guys.
Absolutely. Which game do you think will ultimately be the season definer? when you look at it? When you look at the schedule and your gut instinct here, what do you think we look back? I mean, let's say January of 2025, when we look back on this season, what do you think will ultimately be the season-defining game for Tennessee?
Oklahoma. A huge game. I think playing at Oklahoma, you got Bob Stoops, who fired Josh Heupel. There's no question that Heupel's got that one circled on his schedule. I think he'd like to win that one about as much as any game he's got. But I think that could be one that's a swing game. I think in NC State now, I'm not giving them that game, but I think Oklahoma's an SEC game, is a first true road trip game. I think that's a big one. If you can get by Oklahoma and NC State, and you're undefeated in the month of September, I think that really puts you in a position of going 10-2. If you lose one of those games, I think you're 9-3 at best. And the reason I say that is, if you're not good enough to beat NC State and Oklahoma, I don't think you're good enough to beat Alabama or Georgia. The other thing that concerns you a little bit, Chase, each of the last 2 years, Tennessee has gone on the road and laid an egg. And they actually laid 2 of them last year. One at Florida, one at Missouri.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.